Gebäude irgendwie zum Leben zu bringen. Alles das, was da drin fließt, strömt, macht und tut.
Wenn ich komme, bringe ich das Herz und das Gehirn des Gebäudes mit.
Das macht mir einfach Spaß. Es wird nicht langweilig.
Alles okay?
Ich glaube, ich kriege eine Erkältung.
Eine Erkältung entsteht, Immopret.
And he's saying to them, put down your arms and I give you immunity. So the question is, how can you offer the military immunity at the same time as encouraging the people to sweep away the regime, the IRGC, and all of this? There is a natural tension here, I think. But what I see in both the Trump and the Netanyahu statements is a sense that we want regime change, but the people who deliver it will have to be the Iranian people on the ground themselves. And perhaps, you know, I've heard some reports of American officials talking to Kurds in the border parts of Iran, in the periphery of Iran. I think you will see an Israeli and American effort to encourage the opposition to rise up in mass protests again and sweep away the regime once the bombs have stopped. But there is no guarantee that will succeed. And I think one possibility here is the Iranian regime comes out of this with its leadership killed, with its missiles stockpiles destroyed and degraded, but surviving and able to say, we are surviving, we won't do a nuclear deal, and we're going to be around for another 30 years. And I think that would pose a really significant political challenge to Donald Trump and to the Israelis.
Well, that was the defence editor of The Economist, Shashank Joshi, talking to me a little bit earlier about what potentially could be the outcome here. It's difficult to be able to analyse that now. It's very early days, and this, of course, is a developing story. It's continuing to develop as we speak. We're getting new lines minute by minute, and we're hearing that new blasts have been heard in Doha. That's according to Reuters, who are speaking to witnesses in Doha. We also have had news that leaders from the UAE and Saudi Arabia have been talking. They've been discussing the attacks from Iran in a phone call, the very first one that they've had since the rift. We're hearing quite a lot of news coming out of Iran. In particular, Iranian state media is reporting that there have been explosions heard in Iran's southeastern port city of Chabahar. Explosions heard in that port city in the southeast of the country. So pretty clear that those attacks from the US and from Israel are continuing. They haven't stopped. And also the attacks, retaliatory attacks from Iran are also continuing. And we just mentioned there explosions or blasts being heard in Doha. Some more news from Bahrain. We're hearing that schools in Bahrain have now implemented distance learning until further notice. And also remember, we've been reporting as well that airspace in the region has been closed, and many airlines have already said they are not flying in and out of the region for now because of the dangers being posed by this continuing attack from the US and Israel, but also retaliatory attacks by Iran as well. We're also hearing that President Putin has convened Russia's Security Council virtually over the unfolding situation across US-Iranian strikes. That's according to the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, and that's cited by Russian media. So that's unconfirmed, but we're hearing potentially that could be happening as well. So let's just take a moment now to speak a little bit more about what's been happening inside Israel, what the thought process of Israel has been over the last few weeks in preparation for these attacks. Let's cross live and speak to Avner Vilan, who's worked for the Israeli security services dealing with Iran in the past. Avner, it's very good to get you on the show. Thank you very much for joining us on BBC News. And let me ask you, first of all, for your reaction to what we've been hearing so far.
So, thank you, Miriam. I think that my initial reaction that I hope that this is the final chapter in the long rivalry between the Iranian regime and the like-minded democracies in the West, United States, Israel, and everybody else. This is just another chapter of what's been going on for the last 30 years. Iran has been the major destabilizing force in the region. with its nuclear ambitions, with its humongous missile arsenal that it's been building, targeting way beyond Israel now. Now they can cover most of Europe, and they're building capabilities that even go further. And it's regional meddling. So now I think there's been a window of opportunity after the Iranians foolishly declined to come to an agreement with the United States in the last few weeks, giving up their nuclear program. So there's a window of opportunity to create severe damage to the regime and even change it, topple it by the Iranian people.
But, sorry, excuse me for interrupting, but to be fair, the Iranians were negotiating, weren't they?
Well, the Iranians were negotiating, but the U.S. has been very clear of what it has been expecting. The Iranians didn't even come close. If they would come up to the table and saying, "Hey, we're willing to give up that program, zero enrichment, we're getting all the material out, we don't want to have a nuclear program," then maybe we wouldn't have seen this strike. But there is no reason why Iran needs 60% enriched uranium. Only for building a nuclear weapon. The country's so rich with oil and resources, with its economy in such a bad shape. Why are they insisting in building potentially military nuclear capabilities? So, there was a different course that they could have taken. They should have known that President Trump is serious, and it's in his credible military threats, which we saw today fulfill. So, yes, they were negotiating, but they didn't come with the right attitude. That's my take on this, and we saw the consequences.
You talk about the final chapter. Interesting for me to pull a little bit on that thread. When you say final chapter, do you mean you expect the regime to fall? And if so, how is that going to happen?
So I hope that this regime would fall. I think that Trump was very clear in his speech this morning on how this is going to happen. He expects the Iranian people to come and topple the regime after the bombs cease dropping. I think that we've seen the brave Iranian people go to the streets in January. About 40,000 of them were killed by this horrible regime. They didn't have help back then. Now they have the backing of the United States. And I think that the regime would fall once the IRGC officer or the basij or even the policeman on the street would think twice before shooting his fellow countrymen and saying, "Hey, is this really worth it? Or should I just give in?" And when that happens and they would put down their arms, then this regime would change.
I mean, that hasn't happened so far. How do we know or even hope, in your words, that it will happen this time?
So I think that you can't know for sure this will happen. The minimum that would happen is that the regime would be hit hard. A lot of its leadership would be hit. A lot of its military capabilities, its nuclear capabilities, its missile and Navy capabilities will be hit, which is a good thing for the region. And the conditions for a regime change will be prepared. But will the regime change? Will the Iranian people would actually go out to the streets again, risk their lives again with the Iranian security forces put down their arms, or will they again brutally massacre the Iranian people? This is yet to be seen. I think that the fact that now it's not just them who have the power against the innocent people, but it would be actually the people plus the U.S. and Israeli air support. That's a different equation. So there is a change in condition. Would it lead to a regime change? We'll wait and see.
Well, I'm really interested to kind of get a bit of an insight from you about what kind of calculations Israel would have made about how Iran would react, how the IRGC would react, how people inside Iran would react this time. Do you think that Israel had it in its mind that this time would be different, that it has evidence of that? I mean, we've been hearing that Israel believes it's killed several senior Iranian officials. That's according to sources briefed on the military operation. So that, again, do you think would have played into the decision-making process behind what we've seen today?
I think that, what is rolling out has been actually laid out in plain sight over the last few weeks. The Iranians are doing exactly what they said they would. They said that once they were attacked, they would hit Israel and American forces in the region, which they did. They have their capabilities. Some of them would be deployed automatically, which we just showed that they did. So we're, at least for the next few days, we'll see some Iranian retaliation. I think that there will be no restrictions on the use of force of the Iranians. I think they'll shoot whatever they can. I think Israel and the U.S. have prepared for this for the last few months, basically since June. And we will see casualties with U.S. forces in the region, with hopefully not, but probably will in Israel as well. And this was part of the calculation of starting this. This was taken into account.
How far do you think Israel is willing to go? How far is the U.S. willing to go? Of course, sending missiles to Iran is one thing. Working inside Iran is another. Is there any inkling, do you think, coming from the Israeli government that there's any appetite for that, or even any appetite for that within the U.S. as well?
I don't see any appetite right now for boots on the ground. I think the boots on the ground should be by the Iranian people once the regime will be weakened. Things may change, but I think that there is a lot of damage that could be done from the air. I think the regime is weak. I mean, if you look at the macro scale, the economy is crippling. You see how the rial has dropped. You see that people have no money to buy food. So I think that there is a lot of damage that can be done from the air. I don't see any boots on the ground in the near future. Calculus may change, but even from an operational perspective, we haven't seen neither the U.S. or Israel preparing for that.
Let's talk a little bit about politics, internal politics inside Israel. Of course, Israel has just come out the other side of a brutal war in Gaza. How much appetite is there amongst Israeli people for this war against Iran? Do people want to see it? Are they keen for it? What are people saying inside Israel today?
So I think the way we see it, it's not a completely different war. Iran was one of the prime sponsors of Hamas, who took out the horrendous October 7th attack on innocent Israelis. And we've been at war for the last almost 2.5 years. Iran is the origin of most of the instability in the region. I think that Israelis have sacrificed so much that general public opinion is that we are willing to sacrifice a little more if this thing can be solved now. So I think that, generally speaking, there is backing for this operation in Israel.
And what does Israel want to see the day after? And I'm talking absolutely in terms of, pure conjecture. I'm not saying there will be a day after. But what kind of a government does Israel want to see? In Iran, does it support Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah of Iran? What talks are happening inside Israel right now about that? Or is there no plan for a day after?
So I'm sure that there is a plan. I'm not part of the system anymore. But generally speaking, people of Israel and the Israeli government do support Reza Pahlavi. We do see that he does have support or general support of the Iranian opposition. We would be very happy to see him take control of the country. I think that Israel and Iran have been long friends. Up till 1979, there were 2 direct flights by El Al to Tehran. A lot of joint economic projects together. The Iranian people and the Israeli people share a lot in common in terms of values. So I do think that a person like Reza Pahlavi could actually flourish that relationship once again. He's been to Israel. Israeli officials have been in contact with him, numerous times over the years. So I think generally he is supported. But, this is a little bit too soon to tell.
No, absolutely.
Right now, there is an operation against the military targets, the military leadership, political leadership in Iran. Let's see what the next few days unfold, and then we could talk about the next step.
Absolutely. And Avner Vilan, former senior official in Israel's security establishment, it's been really good to get your analysis and your thoughts. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak to me here on BBC News.
Thank you.
Let's just bring you some new lines that we're getting here at BBC News. This is a fast-moving story, and I want to just bring you back to that school, that primary school in southern Iran, near that important port city of Bandar Abbas in the Minob County region. We're now hearing from an Iranian official that the death toll from that missile attack on that school rising now to 53. That's according to the Islamic Republic News Agency. And that cites a spokesperson for the country's Ministry of Education. Ali Farhadi has told the agency the school was, in his words, targeted by 3 missile attacks today. He also says an additional 63 people were also injured in the attack. The spokesperson said that the school is being cleared of debris to search for other possible victims. And important to underline at this point, the BBC has not been able to independently verify this. International news organisations find it very difficult to get into the country. They're severely limited in their ability to gather information about what's going on inside Iran. And also, there's an internet blackout, so it's very difficult for us to be able to verify anything. But I'm telling you what Iranian officials have said. We're also hearing some other news from Iran's Red Crescent Society that more than 20 of Iran's 31 provinces have been affected in these.
Ja, ich habe jetzt gerade im Meeting
attacks from Israel and from the United States. In the last few minutes, we've also heard from Germany, France and the UK. Now, remember, there was a Cobra meeting in the UK chaired by Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. And after that, we were told by Downing Street that he will be having phone calls with allies like France and Germany. Well, we're now hearing that the Germany, France and the UK have said that they condemn the Iranian attacks on countries in the region in the strongest terms. They condemn the Iranian attacks on countries in the region in the strongest terms. Well, of course, all of this began earlier on today, and we also heard earlier on today from President Trump, who was talking to the world's media about the reasons behind this latest attack. He urged Iranians to take over the government. He said this will probably be your last chance for generations. Let's talk now to our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman, who joins us live now from Washington. Tom, just bring us up to date with what we heard from President Trump earlier, and then if you could talk me through the reaction since then.
Well, I think, what was fundamentally clear from President Trump's address during the night from Florida was that we are now in this uncharted territory of the most far-reaching and potentially consequential form of military attack by the US and Israel, compared to some of the things that have been speculated in the run-up to all of this, because very clearly President Trump is talking about regime change, talking about Iranians taking over the government of the country, which, and certainly some of the briefings, I think, coming from Israeli officials about leadership targeting in this initial wave of strikes. And of course, we don't have any sense of what they're saying the outcome of that is. But very clearly now we're at that sort of far end of the military options that were being presented to President Trump in the days and weeks in the run-up to this. And of course, that comes with huge risks attached, not just domestically for the president, but also, of course, in the region itself. And we're already seeing that play out with Iranian retaliation across the Gulf, in those Gulf Arab countries, targeting US bases and facilities there. And I think President Trump trying to get in early, the sense that acknowledging there is likely to be loss of American life if this continues at this scale and goes on for many days. And I think sort of in that sense, he's trying to preempt the very strong criticism that's already emerging from Congress, mostly, of course, from Democrats at the moment, who are saying this is totally unauthorized by Congress and risk destabilizing the entire region, but also from at least one Republican in Congress so far who is pointing out that this attack has not been authorized by Congress.
And there won't be, will there? There will also be Republicans who, in the past, have been very clear they don't want to get involved in another war. So what are they going to be saying about this?
Yeah, and I mean, President Trump's always acutely aware of what his base thinks and what public opinion is suggesting. And I mean, polling has consistently shown large amounts of opposition to the possibility of another US foreign entanglement in the Middle East. It was exactly the kind of thing that President Trump campaigned on in the election, saying he would not do, and exactly the thing he is now doing jointly with the Israelis. I thought it was interesting and important that in his address, he again used this notion of imminent attack to US soil, which he talked about in his State of the Union speech. He's mentioned this a couple of times now in the run-up to this, suggesting that the Iranians are close to having an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the United States. And he referenced that again in the speech. I think that is, again, trying to sort of preempt what he knows the criticism will be and is already emerging from Congress, that there simply isn't the grounds on presidential executive authority without the authorization of Congress to launch this strike. And I think that's why he's getting that in there. The problem with all of that is that it's just simply not backed by the intelligence assessments. An unclassified intelligence assessment last year suggesting that the Iranians were at least a decade away from developing an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the US. So not backed up by the evidence there. And I think that is why, you know, for many Americans, they're going to look at this and be really concerned that there is a rerun of the playbook in the run-up to the Second Gulf War, where, of course, the notion of imminent threat was with the justification for war, which turned out to be false, of course. The other side of all of this is President Trump's backers, particularly his strongest cheerleader in Congress, Lindsey Graham, who's coming out and saying this is going to amount to the liberation of Iran. That this is about taking out, you know, the potential global threat of the Iranians developing a nuclear weapon. That President Trump's supporters are saying they've given every chance to the Iranians in the negotiations to try to solve. But this is, you know, we talked about at the beginning of this year, the roll of the dice that President Trump took with the raid on Venezuela, snatching Nicolas Maduro. He was warned by all accounts by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, that this, you know, strategy with Iran would, include much, much greater risks. It's of a completely different scale of magnitude, and that is the route that President Trump has taken.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for that. Tom Bateman, State Department correspondent in Washington. Let's now bring in someone from the Missouri University of Science and Technology, Dr. Mehrzad Boroujerdi, who is an Iranian exile there. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us on BBC News. And let me just ask you, first of all, for your reaction as part of the huge Iranian diaspora in the United States, your reaction to what we're seeing today. Do you welcome this move by the US, or are you worried?
I think it's fair to say that the Iranian public, and both inside and outside the country, are mixed, have been polarized. There are people who hold the government in Iran responsible, right, because of its intransigence in the terms of the nuclear negotiations and bringing the country to this stage. And then there are those who are really concerned about the impact of this war, right? How long will it last? What will happen to the citizenry? Will there be chaos? Would there be food scarcity? What will happen to the basic economic infrastructure of the country in the long term? What is clear to me is that, since President Trump has mentioned that this is, he has called for the overthrow of the government, this shows that this conflict is no longer about, nuclear negotiations or making concession on this ground or the other. So we are really on the verge of a huge new development with a lot of uncertainty ahead of us.
Let's talk a little bit about what would fill a power vacuum in Iran. I know that there is a lot of talk amongst Iranian people around the world about Reza Pahlavi, the son of the Shah, who, of course, was exiled and died in exile in Egypt. Do you feel there is a groundswell of support behind him? There doesn't seem to be any other viable option for Iran within the country.
Right. So there is no doubt that Reza Pahlavi is the best known, perhaps best organized member of the Iranian opposition. We saw his name being chanted in the both inside and outside Iran after the recent massacre by the government. The question really is the following: aerial bombardment by U.S. and Israel that can definitely weaken the state, right, or even lead to its overthrow. The question is that unless the Americans and the Israelis, have boots on the ground, the expectation is that the Iranian public will come out and bring about a regime change. I don't necessarily feel that Reza Pahlavi has the organizational muscle and strength really to do that. What will happen, what Washington and Tel Aviv have decided that they want to do to foster this opposition inside the country and sort of, perhaps install him as the next leader remains to be seen. Furthermore, we need to see how the Iranian state, if it manages to, live another day, how will they, react? In other words, will we see a repeat of the massacre that they committed, only a few weeks ago, in terms of putting down anything that they view as being an existential threat?
What do you think? Do you think that this regime, 47 years old, fully entrenched in all parts of Iranian society, will be easily extracted? And if so, how?
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is going to be an easy overthrow of the state. I think the process and also the history of the Middle East, demonstrate that we are in for a messy period. As we all know, politics does not like a vacuum. And when a vacuum is created, some entrepreneurial actor needs to, step in and fill that vacuum. And we need to see exactly, are there, conditions that are conducive to an easy transition, a peaceful transition or not. At least right now, my expectation is, as we are already beginning to see, with Iran firing missiles at its Arab neighbors, that Tehran's strategy to survive is to escalate, right? Before we get to any de-escalation, if there is going to be a de-escalation. On the other hand, the armada that the U.S. has assembled in the region indicates that we are not looking at a conflict that is going to end in a matter of days. And therefore, I think the jury is still out on what will be the end game, the last chapter of this conflict, what is going to happen regionally. Would there be targeting of ships in the Persian Gulf? What will happen to oil prices? How would the UN, react to this thing? Is there a real elimination of the leading cadres of Iranian elite, right? And would the regime live to survive the next day and be able to replace some of those elite members that have been eliminated?
Dr. Borojerdi, you are an Iranian exile. I'm not sure how long you've been exiled from Iran, but do you feel that maybe your opportunity, your chance to go back to your home country is closer now than it has been before, or are you holding off from even thinking about that for now?
Yeah, exile has lasted for 47 years since the beginning of the revolution, and absolutely, I think there are a lot of us who are hoping that this thing will end with the overthrow of this brutal regime, and that 5 or 6 million Iranians who have left the country since 1979 will get a chance to go back and visit their relatives and their places of upbringing.
Okay, Dr. Mehrzad Borojerdi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's just bring you some new lines that we're getting. In the last few minutes, we've heard from Iranian state media. This is through our colleagues at BBC Monitoring. And Iranian state media have denied reports that senior political officials and the country's army chief were killed in that wave of US-Israeli strikes. Remember, we believe that they were targeted in those strikes. We're now hearing, according to a post on X by the executive deputy of the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, that he is safe. The president's son, Youssef Pezeshkian, has written on Telegram and said this time their assassination attempts have not succeeded. Again, it's difficult to independently verify this. This is what we're hearing from our colleagues at BBC Monitoring, who are literally monitoring the situation online. The army has also denied the death of its commander, Major General Amir Hatami. And the hardline news agency FAR says the Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakir Kalibov and the head of the Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani, also remain unharmed. Now, it's unclear whether these men were the targets of the missile attacks, but we do know that the Israel Defense Forces have said that strikes in Tehran did target locations where senior political and security figures were gathered. We've also heard in the last few minutes from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who said that US strikes have given Iranian people a chance to oust a terrorist regime. That is the very latest from Volodymyr Zelensky, who has spoken in the last few minutes. Also, we've had a line from the Germany, France and the UK. They've condemned the Iranian attacks on the Arab nations, those retaliatory attacks that we've seen in the past few hours or so. So let's just update you on what we know so far. We know that the US and Israel have attacked Iran. President Donald Trump has confirmed that what he calls a major combat operation is underway, and he has called for regime change. In the meantime, the Iranian supreme leader and presidential offices in Tehran were reportedly targeted, although Iranian officials have said that key figures within the military and political world have not been killed. We are hearing that at least 53 people have been killed on an attack at a girls' school in southern Iran. Again, these are unverified reports coming into us from Iranian state media. And we are hearing of explosions being heard across Arab nations, including in the last few minutes, Doha and Bahrain. Well, let's get a little bit more now on what we know so far, on the developments so far, with our World Affairs correspondent, Joe Inwood, who has this report.
After weeks of build-up, weeks of threats, this morning the US and Israel left no room for doubt. They want to topple the Iranian regime. Footage is still emerging amidst an internet blackout, but it's clear that a vast air campaign is being carried out right across the country.
The United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated.
So what and who is the US going to target? Well, Iran's ballistic missiles will be top of any list, an attempt to blunt their ability to respond. Iran's Navy, seen here on exercise last week, will also be seen as a soft target. The key question, will they kill the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, or the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei? Iran promised to respond with crushing force. Within an hour of the strikes, air raid sirens could be heard over Israel. The country's Iron Dome missile defences already in action. The Prime Minister warned his people there would be a price to pay.
Challenging days await us. Every military action involves risk, but the risk of doing nothing is greater. Because if we do not act, we will get a nuclear Iran, an Iran with tens of thousands of ballistic missiles.
Some of those ballistic missiles have already been fired in response. The US has a vast military footprint across the Middle East. Ya Allah! And already impacts have been seen at the US naval base in Bahrain, headquarters of the 5th Fleet. Qatar hosts the Al Udeid air base. The last time Iran struck, it was telegraphed in advance and largely performative. Not this time. There have also been reports of drones being intercepted over
Lasst uns ein Land generieren. Mit mehr als 1000 Inseln. Ein Ort, den man mit allen 5 Sinnen erleben kann. Wo man echte Gänsehaut spürt und jedes Abenteuer ganz real ist. Authentisch und reich an Geschichte. Mit unvergesslicher Küche und erlesenen Weinen, die nur darauf warten, entdeckt zu werden. Ein Land, das seine Lebensart bewahrt.
Selbst die KI kann das nicht kreieren.
Doch es ist Kroatien und es ist voller Leben.
For many years you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond.
Iran now faces the biggest military build-up in the Middle East for more than 20 years, and a US administration which has explicitly called for its destruction. It seems likely this conflict will escalate in dangerous and unpredictable ways. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Live from London, I'm Christian Fraser.
And live from Washington, I'm Katrina Perry.
This is BBC News.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
The United States and Israel launched strikes from air and sea in what they say will be a multi-day operation dubbed by the Pentagon Epic Fury. Strikes in Tehran and right across Iran. The Iranian media reports at least 53 people have been killed at a school in the south. Iran has already been retaliating with attacks on American air bases in Bahrain. Explosions have been heard in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan, Iraq, and the UAE.
Dozens of missiles have been fired by Iran targeting Israel. Air defense systems have intercepted the missiles with no reports of damage or casualties.
Sirens and explosions across Israel as a state of emergency is declared, and Israel says a new barrage of Iranian missiles are on their way. In a statement, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there is an existential threat against his country. The UK Foreign Office and many countries around the world are warning their nationals to shelter in place, and airspace is closed across the Middle East. Hello, you're watching BBC News and our live special coverage of the breaking news this hour as the United States and Israel launch airstrikes across Iran. President Trump says the United States and Israel have launched what he's called a major combat operation. President Trump says the objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime. He says Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and he accuses the Republic of trying to rebuild its nuclear program. The president has also said there may be American casualties as a result of the operation that he's dubbed Epic Fury. The retaliation has started from Iran. Bahrain says the US base has come under attack. Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, Iraq and Saudi Arabia also have had missiles fired into their countries. We are also getting reports this hour of one person killed in the United Arab Emirates and 4 people in Syria from missile debris. In a video statement, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the attack is to remove an existential threat to his country. But throughout the morning, we've been hearing air raid sirens and explosions across Israeli cities. Israel's Defense Minister Katz has declared a special and permanent state of emergency. It's closed the country's airspace and all schools are currently closed. Israeli defense forces say dozens of missiles are being fired into the country. 70,000 reservists have been called up. In Iran, the strikes are across multiple locations. Media reports say the blasts have been heard in Isfahan, Karaj, Kermanshah, Qom and the port city of Bushehr. Mehrabad airport just outside Tehran has also come under attack. We're getting pictures of large-scale bombing in Tehran. The Iranian media says at least 53 people have been killed at a school in the south of the country. An official told the Reuters news agency that Tehran's retaliation and the response will be crushing. Israeli officials say Iran's supreme leader The Ayatollah Khamenei and Iran's president were targeted. 7 missiles have hit the presidential palace, and there have been strikes around the supreme leader's compound. The attack follows weeks of tension in the region, with US forces massing around Iran. Well, Joe Inwood has been looking at all the developments so far, and he gave us this report.
After weeks of build-up, weeks of threats, this morning the US and Israel left no room for doubt. They want to topple the Iranian regime. Footage is still emerging amidst an internet blackout, but it's clear that a vast air campaign is being carried out right across the country.
The United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated.
So what and who is the US going to target? Well, Iran's ballistic missiles will be top of any list, an attempt to blunt their ability to respond. Iran's navy, seen here on exercise last week, will also be seen as a soft target. The key question, will they kill the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, or the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei? Iran promised to respond with crushing force. Within an hour of the strikes, air raid sirens could be heard over Israel. The country's Iron Dome missile defences already in action. The Prime Minister warned his people there would be a price to pay.
Challenging days await us. Every military action involves risk, but the risk of doing nothing is greater. Because if we do not act, we will get a nuclear Iran, an Iran with tens of thousands of ballistic missiles.
Some of those ballistic missiles have already been fired in response. The US has a vast military footprint across the Middle East.
Ya Allah!
And already impacts have been seen at the US naval base in Bahrain, headquarters of the 5th Fleet. Qatar hosts the Al Udeid air base. The last time Iran struck, it was telegraphed in advance and largely performative. Not this time. There have also been reports of drones being intercepted over Iraq. Knowing exactly what is happening inside Iran is difficult at this point, with most communications down. But state TV broadcast this statement.
According to the information obtained from these two corrupt regimes, their operations in Tehran and other cities will continue. Therefore, as much as possible, while maintaining calm, travel to other cities to stay safe from the evils of these two regimes.
In January, when widespread street protests gripped the country, President Trump promised help was on its way before taking no immediate action. In today's speech, he said that help had finally arrived.
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond.
Iran now faces the biggest military build-up in the Middle East for more than 20 years, and a US administration which has explicitly called for its destruction. It seems likely this conflict will escalate in dangerous and unpredictable ways. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Let me show you some live pictures from Israel. We have been warned by the Israeli Defense Force that there are missiles coming in, another wave of them. Of course, there is the Iron Dome and David Sling, which would protect against the incoming missiles, ballistic missiles, but it's not hermetic. So a lot of Israelis have been spending time in the bomb shelters this morning, and presumably will be back in the bomb shelters as those air raid sirens sound. Also, some important news to bring you from Saudi Arabia, from Riyadh. The Saudi Foreign Ministry says that the Iranian attacks on Riyadh and eastern regions in the country have been condemned. The Foreign Ministry says the attacks came despite Riyadh saying that it will not allow its airspace to be used against Iran. Saudi Arabia, just one of several Arab countries that has been targeted this morning. Let's go to Washington and speak to my colleague Helena Humphrey, who is there. We've just had a statement, an interesting statement, from the minority leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, who says Iran is a bad actor and must be aggressively confronted, but the Trump administration must seek authorization for the preemptive use of military force that constitutes an act of war. So it does not sound at the outset, Helena, that this is that there is bipartisan support for what is going on.
Christian, I've been looking at this range of reaction from lawmakers throughout the course of the morning as America wakes up to this news. And I think these are the two prongs of reaction that you're seeing right now. You know, many Republicans and Democrats have been pointing out the role Iran has played in the region for a long time. Donald Trump in that video essentially has said that this was about ending what he called a campaign of bloodshed, including against Americans, going back to 1979. He spoke about the Iran hostage crisis. But then, as you mentioned in that statement from Hakeem Jeffries, a note of caution, more than a note of caution from the minority leader in the House, essentially saying that this has to be done with congressional approval. And I will say that when I first saw these strikes at around 2 a.m. local time, by about an hour later, we'd started to see reaction trickle in. And we got that similar message from the Republican lawmaker Thomas Massie. He's a critic of Donald Trump. But what he said was that this is an act of war unauthorized by Congress. It has not been approved by Congress. And since then, that argument has been building. We've heard from the Democrat lawmaker Ro Khanna. He has basically said that he is urging lawmakers to come back, to come to the Hill on Monday and to vote on a war powers resolution, to put their name on the record about where they stand on this, and then also to vote on a resolution limiting the ability of the United States to carry out this without congressional approval. I mean, certainly when it does seem to be, a really significant operation, Donald Trump saying that not only it could last a number of days, he was very clear in that video. He said that we could see US casualties. It was an 8-minute video that he put out. He is now, we understand, in Mar-a-Lago. I know my colleague Bernd de Busman has been travelling, and he is trying to get answers with regards to when we will hear from the president further. For the time being, we haven't had a set time on that.
Yeah, you talk about the duration, Helena. There's some important statements being made at the moment. The Israelis are saying that this is on a completely different scale to the 12-day war last June, which does tend to suggest we could be talking weeks rather than days. The Iranian foreign minister has just commented as well, says we don't need anybody for our defence. We are capable enough to defend ourselves. So some strong talk from the Iranians today. And of course, the retaliation is there for all to see. How is the MAGA movement within America going to react to this? Because Donald Trump, of course, was highly critical of previous presidents that got involved in conflicts in the Middle East and campaigned on bringing peace to the region.
That's such an important point to raise, I think, particularly for Americans waking up to this morning, because, yes, Christian, in media circles, in diplomatic circles, of course, there has been speculation for days, if not months, with regards to whether Donald Trump would strike. But for ordinary Americans waking up today who haven't seen statements from the likes of the US Embassy in Jerusalem urging non-essential personnel, for example, to leave, they will be surprised by this. And essentially, we don't know how long this could go on for, but all of the emphasis has been from regional players that it could go on for quite some time. Donald Trump, clearly in his statement, was trying to lay the groundwork for that. But, let's just go back to that campaign trail for a second go-around in the White House from Donald Trump. He had essentially promised, he had vowed for fewer foreign entanglements, not more. And, essentially said that he was campaigning against foreign wars, that he would be, there wouldn't be these forever wars, that he would solve the war in Ukraine, for example, within 24 hours, which he's since said, is proving more tricky. But instead, what have we seen when it comes to Venezuela, for example? Now, with regards to what we are seeing in Iran, and I think for his base, of course, that just begs the question, what is this more muscular approach that we're seeing when it comes to foreign policy? For many people, that is not what they voted for.
Helena, for the moment, thank you very much. We'll come back to you through the day. Thank you for that. I was in Geneva on Thursday, of course, for those talks around the nuclear programme. The Iranian Foreign Ministry statement, which is ongoing, says Iran has bitter experience from talking to the United States. There were supposed to be technical talks in Vienna on Monday and then high-level talks later in the week. But as I made the point on Thursday, there was every chance, as we saw last summer, that the talks would be preempted by military action, and here we are. Let's go to the Middle East and speak to our correspondent Hugo Bachega, who is in Jerusalem. You should probably bring us up to speed, Hugo, if you would, with the events this morning and what you've witnessed.
Yeah, Christian, so it is just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon here, and we heard about an hour ago air raid sirens again here in Jerusalem, and the sound of loud explosions of air defenses activated, possibly intercepting missiles that had been fired by Iran. And in the last hour there have been air raid alerts also in central parts of Israel and in Tel Aviv, but there haven't been reports of hits, of casualties, damage. Obviously, this is a country with a very sophisticated, successful air defense system. So I remember being here last year during the 12-day war, and the Israeli military was then extremely successful in intercepting the vast majority of the missiles that had been fired by Iran. And today, some Israeli officials are saying that dozens of missiles had been fired by Iran as part of this response following these American and Israeli attacks. Now, we've heard part of what President Trump had to say, trying to explain what is happening here today, the start of, as he described it, as major combat operations in Iran. And we also had a statement by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Obviously, Netanyahu has spent decades talking about what he has described as the existential threat posed by Iran. And again, he said that what is happening here today, the goal is to remove the existential threat posed by the regime in Iran. He talked about Iran's nuclear ambitions, again accusing Iran of trying to develop a nuclear weapon, something that the Iranian authorities have repeatedly denied. And he also said that what is happening here today, the attacks in Iran, are, the goal here is to create conditions for the Iranian people to take their destiny into their own hands. So indicating here that perhaps one of the goals is to create, a scenario in which, the regime in Iran could fall. So regime change in Iran, something that the Prime Minister has been defending for quite some time. And you mentioned also, Christian, the diplomatic efforts that were underway to try to come up with a deal to curb Iran's nuclear ambitions. And the Prime Minister had publicly warned against the idea of a deal that could that would only focus on Iran's nuclear program, because again, Benjamin Netanyahu had talked about the threat posed by Iran's ballistic missiles and also by the proxies that Iran supports in the region, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen. And if you look at the targets, that were hit in the first wave of attacks by the Americans, by the Israelis, you see that not only military facilities were hit, but also buildings and facilities linked to the Iranian leadership. So again, another indication here that, one of the goals of this operation could be to create the situation for a change of the leadership in Iran.
Just had a statement, Hugo, from the IDF while you've been talking, which really underpins what you've just been describing. They say that a short while ago, the IDF, guided by IDF intelligence, completed a broad strike against strategic defense systems belonging to the regime. One of the strikes was directed towards an advanced aerial defense system located in western Iran. Throughout the war, and particularly during Operation Rising Lion, they go on, the IDF significantly damaged the defense system of the Iranian regime. And that really is the point, I think, Hugo, that it was the Israelis pushing the Americans. The opportunity was here from their perspective. There was a window opened by the 12-day war last summer, which both sides, from their perspective, needed to exploit.
Exactly, and I think it's very important to remember that we've seen this huge American military build-up in the Middle East, the largest American military build-up in the region since 2003, the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, and the president hasn't really explained, why there could be the need to take military action against Iran. He hasn't really, laid out a case for taking military action against Iran, and why there was this sense of urgency here. Why there was this sense of an emergency when it comes to what he says was the threat posed by Iran. He talked about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Obviously, last year during the 12-day war, the Americans, joined the Israelis in attacking Iran, and the president said that, Iran's nuclear facilities had been obliterated after those attacks. And Iran since then says that, its enrichment activity, which has been one of the main points of disagreement, of concern here in this crisis, had stopped following those attacks, even though international inspectors hadn't been given access to those facilities. And there's been a lot of talk about Iran's ballistic missiles, and the idea, as the president said in the video today, that Iran was developing missiles that could soon, in the president's words, strike the United States. Something that, intelligence officers and, experts say doesn't reflect where the Iranians were in terms of their development of ballistic missiles. So there will be, a lot of debate, discussion in the coming hours and days about the justifications and the explanations that have been given by President Trump to justify what is happening here today. But as you say, one of the supporters of intervention, of a military campaign against Iran, has been the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And it is very possible that they have seen here a window of opportunity to attack Iran's military facilities, but also, again, to create the situation that could lead to a change in the regime in Iran.
Hugo, that's very useful. Thank you very much indeed for the moment. I was telling you that there is an Iranian Foreign Ministry statement which is still coming out. Some top lines from that. The Iranian Foreign Ministry say that for now there is no communication with the United States. So, as we presume, the technical talks in Vienna on Monday are off. But they say if the United States wants to talk, they know how to reach out. We are interested in de-escalation, says this statement, and it goes on to say that the attack should stop first, and then there would be the possibility to talk. That's something we should explore politically a little later on, whether Donald Trump is looking for leverage here to push the Iranians further in the negotiation that they've already started. Let's have a listen to him speaking earlier from Mar-a-Lago.
We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated. We're going to annihilate their Navy. We're going to ensure that the region's terrorist proxies can no longer destabilize the region or the world. My administration has taken every possible step to minimize the risk to U.S. personnel in the region. Even so, and I do not make this statement lightly, the Iranian regime seeks to kill. The lives of courageous American heroes may be lost, and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. But we're doing this not for now. We're doing this for the future, and it is a noble mission. We pray for every service member as they selflessly risk their lives to ensure that Americans and our children will never be threatened by a nuclear-armed Iran. We ask God to protect all of our heroes in harm's way.
Das Beste an den Alpen? Die Weite.
Will prevail. We have the greatest in the world, and they will prevail. To the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the armed forces, and all of the police, I say tonight that you must lay down your weapons and have complete immunity, or, in the alternative, face certain death. So, lay down your arms. You will be treated fairly with total immunity, or you will face certain death. Finally, to the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond. America is backing you with overwhelming strength and devastating force. Now is the time to seize control of your destiny and to unleash the prosperous and glorious future that is close within your reach. This is the moment for action. Do not let it pass.
Donald Trump there putting his country on notice that this could be a long-running conflict and that US servicemen and women will be in harm's way. Let's bring in our colleague Katrina Perry, who's with us in Washington. Can I get a comment from you, Katrina, just at the outset about the style of that? No speech from the Oval Office, a president in a baseball cap at Mar-a-Lago sending US servicemen and women to war. How will the country view that?
Very starkly, I think, Christian. You have to remember it's just 25 past 9 in the morning here on the East Coast, Saturday morning. The weather just starting to come out of that snow ice situation that we've had for weeks here. So people are just waking up to this news, seeing that video as you described, that black backdrop filmed in Mar-a-Lago, no press pool there, the baseball cap. And that stark line, we just heard it in the clip that we just played there. You know, I do not make this statement lightly. The Iranian regime seeks to kill the lives of courageous American heroes. Their lives may be lost and we may have casualties. That often happens in war. Hearing those words coming from a president who campaigned and even referenced in his inaugural address that he was putting an end to forever wars, that he wasn't going to put the US military in harm's way for wars on other continents, for fights in other borders, essentially. That's a really stark message to wake up to this morning. And the earlier part of his speech, if we just go back to that, we didn't play it in that clip. The whole thing is about 8 minutes long. But that is when President Trump laid out the case for what he's doing. It's what we were expecting him to say in that State of the Union address before the joint session of Congress on Tuesday night, when all the nation was tuned in and many people abroad as well, expecting him to lay out that case. And he chose not to on that occasion. But he's done it here again in the wee hours of the morning when most Americans would have been asleep, talking through the case for American national security as he sees it, because of course that is the buzzword. If you're an American citizen looking at this, you're saying, what's in it for us? Why are we putting our members of the military in harm's way? He talks as well about making sure that the regime never has a nuclear weapon and how he obliterated it during Operation Midnight Hammer back in June. Well, of course, whether he actually obliterated or not is a question that's up for much debate, because we were told by members of the administration just this day last week that they thought Iran was within 1 week of having a military-grade nuclear weapon ready to use. Then he goes on to talk about the protests as well. And again, we've spoken so often, haven't we, about how he had said at the time of those protests when thousands of Iranians were killed. We don't know for sure how many because we can't get accurate information from there. When he said help is on its way, and that help didn't turn up until this point. He is casting this action as part of that help that he described back then as well. And then the issue of regime change, again, in the clip we just heard there, laying out that this is regime change, but not that America is going to be the one to make the regime change, but rather they are laying the conditions for the Iranian people to do the regime change himself. When we are finished, he says, take over the government. It will be yours to take. Later saying, this is the moment for action. Do not let it pass. So words for the Iranian people, but most of this is for the American people who are just waking up this morning to find that their country is at war, that there's already been one retaliatory strike on US members of the military in Bahrain. We hear from the NYPD that they have put extra officers in place in certain areas in New York. I suspect we'll start to hear that about other parts of this country as the day progresses as well. But this is something, and again, we can tell from the mixed political reaction that we're already seeing.
All that said, Katrina, he did inform the Gang of Eight we're told, by Mike Johnson, the
Yes.
House Speaker, this morning. So they were in the picture earlier in the week that something was pending, and clearly other European countries were in the picture because a lot of them withdrew their nationals from foreign embassies yesterday. So there was a suggestion that something was pending. What about the case for the war? Because the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has just put this statement out. He said all member states must respect their obligations under international law, including the Charter of the United Nations. It clearly prohibits the threat of the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. We need an immediate cessation. So he is saying that this is an illegal war. Donald Trump would say otherwise.
And indeed, we're hearing from some members of the Security Council that they are trying to get an emergency meeting to be held in New York later today to discuss that exact thing. But if we think back to what happened in Venezuela, much international outcry about how that was a breach of international law. The administration here saying, no, it was in their rights. And we've seen time and time again from President Trump, whether it's domestic or international policy, that he does what he says is in the best interests of Americans, and I think that's what we're saying here. But yeah, really interesting as well, Christian, when you mentioned that statement from Speaker Johnson that the Gang of Eight was briefed earlier in the week. To the extent of the timing of that, we don't know, but I'm sure we'll learn as the day goes on.
Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister in Iran, has been speaking while we've been on air this hour. He says, I still see a possibility to reach a deal which can guarantee that Iran's nuclear program is peaceful, which is the ultimate objective for Donald Trump. Do you think the Israelis and the Americans share the same objective as to what the purpose of this operation is?
I think they do at this point. They haven't at parts of the last few weeks, and we can see that in the public statements that have been made, particularly from President Trump, initially saying he wanted to help protesters, he wanted to make sure Iran didn't have a nuclear regime, then bringing in those views that we'd heard repeated from the Israeli Prime Minister about it being about ballistic missile capabilities as well, and other capabilities like that. But I think now, given everything that we've seen in this essentially joint mission between the US and Israel, that they are aligned on some points, but how closely they stay aligned, we'll just have to see. I mean, again, we were in the middle of a diplomatic talks process, hearing from J.D. Vance just about 24 hours ago, the Vice President, that they were waiting to kind of exhaust these diplomatic channels. And as we see now, that hasn't happened.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio due in Israel next week, so we will watch that closely. Katrina, we're going to come back to you, but we're just going to go to Downing Street for a short time and speak to Matt Cole, our political correspondent, who is there. And you've been watching, Matt, this morning, reaction to the Cobra meeting that the Prime Minister was chairing. Do we know what the UK position is at this moment in time?
No, hi there, Christian. We understand that Cobra meeting lasted about an hour. Cobra, a term they use because the meetings take place in a room called Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. That meeting lasted about an hour, from 9:30 to 10:30 this morning, local time. And we are now waiting this afternoon to understand what the position is from the British government on this. We know that the Prime Minister chaired that meeting. I understand it was attended by senior ministers as well, the likes of the Defence Secretary, who actually I saw go in about 45 minutes ago, the Foreign Secretary, 2 senior military officials. After that meeting, we understand that there were a series of phone calls scheduled with other allies, as Downing Street put it, the likes of France and Germany's leaders. But we've had no formal response since that meeting or any of those calls. We did get a statement, kind of a holding position, if you like, from the British government this morning. A Downing Street spokesman having, we received confirmation Britain wasn't involved in these strikes, but we're told, that said, the British position is that Iran must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon, and that is why the British government says they have continually supported efforts to reach a negotiated solution. We do not want, this statement said, to see further escalation into a wider regional conflict. So we do wait for formal response from the Prime Minister from the government. We have had, Christian, though, quite a bit of reaction across the political spectrum here. It's kind of a left-right split. The Conservative Party has given its backing to the action by the US and Israel, says it fully supports the UK's allies. Reform UK, they say similarly. In fact, they want to go further. They want Britain to offer the use of British bases like that in the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia, for use in these strikes, something that the Prime Minister ruled out a week or so back. But on the left of politics, quite a few of the government's own Labour MPs have been suggesting that this should be condemned. The Green Party, fresh from a big by-election victory here in the last couple of days, they are saying that they see this as ill-advised and illegal. And quite a lot on the left of British politics are taking a similar view. So opinion divided. We wait to hear what the formal response is from the Prime Minister.
Matt, for the moment, thank you very much for that. I did mention just while we were talking to Katrina that the Gang of Eight were informed of this action ahead of time. I should explain to you who the Gang of Eight are. That includes the leaders of the two parties from both the Senate and House of Representatives and the chair and ranking minority members of both the Senate committee. And the Pentagon, in fact, in the last minute has just said that they also provided notification to the Armed Services Committee early this morning after the airstrikes had commenced. Let's speak to Alison Kaplan-Summer, journalist for Haaretz in Tel Aviv. She's been sheltering following the sirens this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Bring us up to speed with what you've witnessed there today.
Well, thanks for having me. And I don't know if you can hear them, but there's actually sirens wailing in the background as you speak. I've been in the shelter about 4 times today, and there will probably be more ahead. Israelis were well prepared for this. It woke everybody up at about 8 this morning, Israel time, with the announcement initially that that Israel had begun an attack on Iran, and then quickly the news came that it was a joint Israel and American operation. Israelis and the Israeli leadership are basically glad that finally, after about a month and a half of back and forth, will an attack happen, won't an attack happen, that there's some kind of action happening. We were watching the diplomatic talks very closely, the nuclear negotiations, and at the same time watching the U.S. forces mass around Iran, and a sense that this was going to happen sooner or later. In the last minutes, really in the last 15 or 20 minutes or so, there have been widespread reports in the Israeli media that Supreme Leader Khamenei has been either injured or killed. We're all still waiting to hear those confirmations.
Yeah. Just on that point, I mean, the Foreign Ministry just put out a statement saying that the leadership is intact. They're denying that, but obviously there's a lot of things we don't know at this current juncture. How much support do you think there will be in Israel for what is unfolding?
Well, a great deal of support. The President Trump spoke about future abilities for Iranian missiles to reach the United States. Well, we know for a fact that Iranian missiles can and do reach Israel and pose a severe threat. You have to remember, this is a regime that for nearly half a century has been declaring that one of its main goals is to destroy the state of Israel. So any kind of move to severely degrade its capabilities, both its nuclear capabilities and its missile capabilities,
Alison,
and the possibility of overturning this regime, is definitely something that most Israelis would support.
Alison, I'm sorry to jump in, but the Prime Minister here is speaking. We're just going to listen to that. Stay there if you would. Sakir Starmer is at the podium. Let's listen in.
As part of our commitment to the security of our allies in the Middle East, we have a range of defensive capabilities in the region, which we've recently strengthened. Our forces are active, and British planes are in the sky today as part of coordinated regional defensive operations to protect our people, our interests, and our allies, as Britain has done before, in line with international law. We've stepped up protections for British bases and personnel to their highest level. We are also reaching out to UK nationals in the region and doing everything we can to support them. I've been speaking with leaders today from the E3 and across the region. It is vital that we prevent further escalation and return to a diplomatic process. We want to see peace and security and the protection of civilian life. Iran can end this now. They should refrain from further strikes, give up their weapons programs, and cease the appalling violence and repression against the Iranian people, who deserve the right to determine their own future in line with our long-standing position. This is the route to de-escalation and back to the negotiating table. Thank you.
So, a short statement from Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister. That was a recorded statement, which we've received in the last few minutes. British planes, he's confirming, are in the sky, but as part of defensive operations, not offensive operations. They are there, he says, to protect allies in line with international law. Protection has been stepped up for British bases, and obviously they're reaching out to British personnel in the region and to British nationals, doing everything we can, he says, to support them. And this morning he has been on the phone with the leaders of France and Germany. But the key line, this, as far as he is concerned, is the route back to the negotiating table. And that we have sort of had a signal from Iran in the last few minutes that the Iranians would be prepared to resume negotiations if the military strikes stop. Let's go back to Katrina, who is in Washington and observing. We just lost Alison, who we were talking to in Tel Aviv. She's in a bomb shelter because there's another wave of strikes coming in, Katrina. But it seems to me that the Europeans are going to be pushing for talks to continue in Vienna next week, however unlikely that might be, while airstrikes are continuing.
Yeah, that's the sense we got from Sir Keir Starmer there, for sure. We're also seeing in the last while that there have been a flurry of phone calls. Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to the German Chancellor Merz. Also, Emmanuel Macron making statements. He's calling his Security Committee for...
Starte dein Jahr mit Ruhm.
You know, how they were going to see this through to the end and then leave it to the Iranian people. So I think, you know, we've been making requests of the White House. Are we going to hear from President Trump today? Are we going to hear from any members of the administration? And at this point in time, that doesn't look likely, at least not for the next few hours. So it may be that they are formulating what their response to all of this is, but definitely a lot of pressure now coming on from the international community to de-escalate, to step back and to move this back into a place of diplomacy.
There was some fascinating reporting from the Washington Post last week. Comments that apparently General Dan Kane, the chair of the Joint Chiefs, gave within a national security setting, that this couldn't be sustained for a long period of time, largely because the missiles that they need, defensive missiles and the ship missiles, have been depleted during operations last year. And he seems to have prepared the president for a very different form of retaliation, which we're perhaps already seeing from Iran, than what we got last summer. It wasn't telegraphed today. It wasn't performative. This was much more serious. It's on a different scale, say the Israelis, the retaliation, to what we saw last summer. And so there is going to be a very heated political debate now in Washington, is there not, about what the endgame is here.
There absolutely will be. And Christian, just say, it can bring some breaking news out. Our colleagues have confirmed there will be an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council today. That has been called for 9 p.m. in the UK, 4 p.m. here on the east coast of the US. So that, again, just speaking to how seriously the international community is taking this issue. But we can see in the responses that are coming to us already, although it is still quite early here, from the various politicians, about the level of debate here, notwithstanding that we're hearing that the group of 8, as you were mentioning earlier, the sort of leadership and the intelligence and security leadership on Capitol Hill were briefed about what was going on. So they have had some idea. That doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that they're in agreement or that they think it's a good idea. And we are already seeing bipartisan calls for the president to go to Congress on this and seek an authorization for any further action, because any time that you have, I suppose, 2 key things here. One, putting the US in a risky position, as it is now, having launched these attacks on Iran and the retaliation that we're seeing. And number 2, using the US military at such a level like this. I mean, the build-up that we saw in the Gulf area in advance of this was quite extraordinary. We had seen such a heavy presence, of course, in the Caribbean, with the actions in Venezuela and on the boats in the Caribbean Sea there, many of those relocating to the Gulf. So any time putting the US military in harm's way like that, a very serious matter here. So there'll be a lot of political debate on this, and who knows where it will end.
If this is the route back to the negotiating table, as Keir Starmer thinks it is, what was it about the talks in Geneva that Donald Trump didn't particularly like? I mean, we were commenting on Thursday night from Geneva that it broke up quite quickly in the evening. There'd been a suggestion that the Americans wanted to take out the enriched uranium from Iran, which was rejected by the Iranians, but they'd gone further than perhaps they had in previous negotiations. So is there any suggestion from the White House which bit of this they didn't like?
There isn't at this point, but we did hear President Trump say yesterday, didn't we, that the Iranians had not gone far enough, even though they had said they'd gone further than they had planned to do. So it seems from President Trump's perspective that he wants perhaps what is not deliverable, which is a complete removal of any nuclear capabilities, any nuclear materials from Iran. And it's unclear what the end game there is. Very interesting that Marco Rubio was due to be in Israel on Monday and Tuesday. We've no information as to whether that trip is still going ahead or not. I suppose it depends on just how hot this phase of attacks will be at that point, but we are hearing from the administration that this is a multi-day operation, so not like what we saw last June, which was very limited. And you'll remember we had that press conference with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, and the Secretary of Defence or Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, the next day with pictures and telling us everything that had happened. No indication that we're likely to see that anytime soon this time.
Just reading from one news agency, AFP, that a loud explosion and a plume of smoke has been seen in Dubai. Interesting that Dubai is a target, because very often United Arab Emirates escapes some of this retaliation, but not on this occasion. Katrina, for the moment, thank you very much. Let's bring in the former BBC journalist, Mehrdad Farahmand, former Persian BBC journalist who has been monitoring the regional reaction to all of this. I do feel that the bit of this picture that we don't yet fully understand is just how wide the attacks have been in Iran today and what they've hit. Are you getting any better impression of that?
Well, the contact with Iran is very difficult. I've got just a few friends from Iran who sometimes can have access to the internet and I can talk to them. Obviously, they don't know much. Their information only comes from what they see around them. The state media is actually not very helpful in giving people information about what is exactly going on, about the casualties, about the places targeted, and about what people should do, because people don't know how, if they do they have to leave the capital, do they have to stay, what's going to happen, will there be enough food resources and fuel for the next few days, how long is it going to take? And as I said, the state media is not very helpful, and their access to the international media and to the outside world because of the internet cut is very limited.
If the objective is regime change, which both the American president and the Israeli prime minister have been talking about this morning, our experience of that in other countries in the Middle East is not positive. That's an understatement. It seems to me that it would unleash enormous chaos in Iran, factional chaos, political, military splits. There doesn't seem to be a very clear idea being provided of what would replace this regime.
Exactly. Firstly, it doesn't look possible to topple the regime only by air strikes. I mean, no, I don't think there is any regime that you can overthrow by airstrikes. And Iran is not Venezuela. So the Venezuela story for Iran is not actually. I don't think it's tangible. It cannot happen in Iran because of the geography. And so there needs to be people on the ground, armed people exactly on the ground to cause the overthrow of the regime. And we know that Americans are not prepared to have foot on the ground. They are not going to do another war or like as in Iraq or as in Afghanistan. Therefore, what remains is that so how they're gonna bomb targets in Iran for a few days. How long it's going to happen? I mean, it depends on Iran's responses. If Iran's responses are as controlled and limited as we saw today, so this is not going to, the flame of war is not going to grow further. And maybe it will be like another 12-day war that we witnessed last year. But if they are serious in overthrowing the regime, they must have a plan for mobilizing some forces on the ground. They could be kind of like Kurdish separatists, Baloch separatists, or some armed groups who have been active outside Iran for decades. They can use them. But then the result will look like Syria, and I don't think anyone in the region...
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean,
Exactly.
the regime has spent decades setting up its internal defences, not to mention its external defences. Today, by all accounts, there are millions of Basij on the streets in every district of Tehran as well, an attachment to the IRGC. So when the Prime Minister of Israel says, rise up, this is your time, that's easier said than done.
Exactly, and that also gives a very simplistic view of the events to many people in Iran, who think that Americans and Israelis have come to their help to overthrow the regime. But first of all, if people come out to the streets, as it happened last month, the result will be another disaster, another bloodshed. Because the regime is still fully equipped and in control to suppress any uprising in the streets. And the mobilizing armed groups on the ground, as I said, will cause another Syria. And I don't think President Trump wants another Syria. I'm not sure about Benjamin Netanyahu, but I'm sure that President Trump doesn't like another Syria in the region, a bigger Syria, in fact. And also the other Iranian neighbors don't want another Syria. The other thing is that Iran is very different. The construction of power in Iran is a lot different from what we saw in Syria, in Iraq. It's much more complicated. And as for decades, they have prepared themselves for such occasions. The structure of the army, the intelligence agencies, security forces, all of them is so complicated that they cannot be treated as easily as they were treated in Iraq.
Mehrdad, really good to get your analysis. Thank you very much indeed for that. Mikey Kay is here in the studio, partner from the Security Brief. Incidentally, there is a very good edition, I would say that, of the Security Brief, which is running on YouTube, but it really does give you a full picture of what the American and military forces will be concentrating on and the response that might come. I want to turn, though, Mike, if I could, to the statement from the Prime Minister we just had here, who says that British planes are in the sky as part of defensive operations to protect allies in line with international law, which might surprise some people because the British government's made a point of saying that it's not involved, but they are involved in one aspect. So what will that look like?
Well, they're involved in proximity through the base in Cyprus. Royal Air Force Akrotiri was deployed out there earlier on in my career. And its proximity is obviously well within the range of the ballistic missiles that Iran are using. That's not to say that it would be a target because the UK hasn't been involved in any of the kinetic activity that we've seen. There were a squadron, not a squadron, but there are a deployment of F-35B aircraft there. They were put out there recently, and when the Prime Minister talks about aircraft in the skies, those F-35Bs will be up, probably doing some form of racetrack combat air patrol, and obviously looking for any ballistics that might come RAF Akureyri's way. Unlikely, because it's not, the UK isn't part of that yet, but they're just putting up as a precautionary measure.
On that point, we talk about the expense of air defence missiles and perhaps also the shortage of them. Is it easier to strike ballistic missiles from the air?
Well, obviously, because the aircraft is airborne, it's closer to the threat, but the type of missiles that we're talking about that the F-35 will carry won't go as fast as THAAD, for example, the Terminal High Altitude Air Defence System, which we've seen deployed into the Middle East. That can go at about Mach 8. That comes off the rail and goes through.
So what are they defending against then? Is it the Shahads? Is it the drones? What is it?
No, the Shaheds don't have the range to come from Iran to Cyprus, so it'll predominantly be...
But presumably they're looking after other Middle Eastern countries as well. I mean, Bahrain, Jordan, the Brits would have a keen eye on that as well.
We don't know... We don't know where they're currently patrolling in the air, and I would suggest that if the F-35Bs were tasked to do as you've just said, that would make RAF Akureyri a target. It would bring them in. So I would go with probably in defence of RAF Akureyri, probably not over the Middle East, but we don't know. I mean, the UK they're not just in RAF Akureyri, they're closer to the threat. They have an air expeditionary wing in Al Udeid. That basically is there to facilitate UK air operations.
And the Brits have some representation in Bahrain, obviously. They have some personnel embedded within the Fifth Fleet, but they also have the Naval Support Facility, which is there in support of the Middle East Operation Kipion, which the Brits have been involved in for a long time. So these missiles, these incoming missiles that we've seen this morning, will be of concern to the British government.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a map and a zoom in of the Naval Support Facility there. I mean, it's home to the American Fifth Fleet, which is the headquarters that runs all the operations. There we go. So that's the actual facility itself. As you say, the UK are there. They have 150 personnel deployed. What that number is at the moment, we don't know, but it generally has 150. And what's based out of there is the reason the UK are there is there's a minesweeper called HMS Middleton, which is, I think we've got a picture of HMS Middleton there. It's a minesweeper, and that's what its role is basically to, protect things like the Straits of Hormuz, which we'll come on to in a second. If we've got a picture of HMS Middleton, I think we'll put it up. It's coming now. But it's things like, because of the importance of the Straits of Hormuz, for example, which we'll come on to in a second, that's why it's there. It's to facilitate
Should
access.
we be worried about that, given that it's not part of a fleet of ships? I mean, obviously the strike group that's attached to the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald Ford, they're all operating together. There's multi-layered air defence for all of those ships, but not for a minesweeper.
Well, you've got...
And not for shipping in the Straits of Hormuz.
Well, that'll come out. So you've got the Gerald Ford, which is in the Middle East at the moment, and that's geographically, strategically placed to keep as far away from the threat as possible, so the Shahed threat, for example. But it's going to be within range of the ballistics, and more importantly, it's going to be in range of the Fatah-1 and the Fatah-2.
And we were making the point in Geneva. I mean, if you're the Iranians, the moral victory of hitting one of these ships from any of the NATO countries that are operating in that area would be significant and politically risky for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate strategic failure would be any form of damage on one of the carriers. You've got the Lincoln, which is a carrier group which was last seen off the coast in the Gulf of Oman. But I think just going back to the Naval Support Facility, you talked about, is it under threat from ballistic missiles? We've actually seen Shahed 136 drone get through air defences. I think we've got a graphic of the Shahed 136. Let me just tell the viewers what the Shahed 136 is. Oh, that's the video. So a Shahed 136 basically is...
Oh, you can see it coming in there.
Exactly.
Much slower than a ballistic missile.
About 120 miles an hour. If we can replay that video again and just pause it mid-flight, the Shahed 136 travels at about 120 miles an hour. So it's an easy target, potentially, to take out. It's got about a 50-kilogram warhead. And when you look at the damage that the volume of these are doing in Ukraine... Yeah. It's potentially a threat. Now, that was a single Shahed 136.
What if you sent a wave of them?
Well, exactly. Now, you can take them. I mean, the fact that one got through is, I would argue, is quite worrying. But if you put up 20, 30, like Russia's doing against Ukraine, there you go. There's a Shahed 136. That's what it looks like.
And they produce these in huge numbers.
Yeah, it's about 5,000 a day, reports are in Russia at the moment. 60,000 of those alone were dropped on Ukraine in 2025, and there's been over 12,000 that have been dropped on Ukraine so far this year.
Can you quickly talk to me about the geography of the Straits of Hormuz? Because obviously for the Arab Gulf states, significant to their economy, significant to the world economy in terms of supply and shipping and energy. Why? What is it about the geography of that area that is of particular concern?
Economically and militarily. Economically, 20% of the world's oil supply flows through the Straits of Hormuz every single day. So if you affect that, oil spikes rise.
Yeah.
And then militarily, you've got all the Persian all the Persian countries from Iraq, Kuwait, that all have access to the Persian Gulf down to Qatar, UAE. Militarily, it's vital that the Straits of Hormuz is kept open to provide naval security for those Persian states. So that's the importance of the Straits of Hormuz.
Right. And just very briefly, I want to just bring people some things that we've just had in the last few minutes. We're about to hear a statement from Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, which tells me that he's still alive, despite the reports from Israel that he might have been injured.
Well, his facility was targeted.
Interesting that these were morning strikes as well, so they obviously tried to catch people in their offices.
Yeah, I mean, I would suggest that, given the build-up and we were out in Geneva on Thursday covering the Iran talks, and obviously they didn't go as successful as we would have hoped. I would argue that there's no way that the Ayatollah would have been in that presidential palace. It'll be in an underground compound somewhere.
Mikey, we're going to talk plenty more through the day because there are all sorts of military questions we have at this point in time. You are watching a special programme from the BBC. Live from London, I'm Christian Fraser.
And I'm Katrina Perry in Washington. This is BBC News.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran.
The United States and Israel launched strikes from air and sea in what they say will be a multi-day operation dubbed by the Pentagon Epic Fury. Strikes in Tehran and right across Iran. The Iranian media reports say at least 53 people were killed at a school in the south.
Iran has already been retaliating with attacks on American air bases in Bahrain. Explosions have been heard in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Jordan, Iraq, and the UAE. Sirens and explosions across Israel as a state of emergency is declared, and Israel says a new barrage of Iranian missiles are on their way.
In a statement, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there is an existential threat to his country. And here in the UK, the Prime Minister has warned against further escalation, but says Britain is taking part in defensive operations.
Our forces are active, and British planes are in the sky today as part of coordinated regional defensive operations.
Hello, you're watching BBC News and our continuing coverage of the breaking news this hour. The United States and Israel have launched airstrikes across Iran.
I'm your baby, baby bell.
Entdecke ein Netz voller Geschmack. Babybell. Snack was Gutes.
Have had missiles fired into their countries. In the last few minutes, the Prime Minister here has said British planes are in the skies in what he called a defensive operation. He said the UK had not been involved in the strikes on Iran.
Well, more on all of that still to come, but first, Joe Inwood has the latest on developments so far.
After weeks of build-up, weeks of threats, This morning, the US and Israel left no room
Jolly
for
memang gitu
doubt.
nan.
They want to topple the Iranian regime. Footage is still emerging amidst an internet blackout, but it's clear that a vast air campaign is being carried out right across the country.
The United States military is undertaking a massive and ongoing operation to prevent this very wicked, radical dictatorship from threatening America and our core national security interests. We are going to destroy their missiles and raise their missile industry to the ground. It will be totally, again, obliterated.
So what and who is the US going to target? Well, Iran's ballistic missiles will be top of any list, an attempt to blunt their ability to respond. Iran's navy, seen here on exercise last week, will also be seen as a soft target. The key question, will they kill the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, or the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei? Iran promised to respond with crushing force. Within an hour of the strikes, air raid sirens could be heard over Israel. The country's Iron Dome missile defences already in action. The Prime Minister warned his people there would be a price to pay.
Challenging days await us. Every military action involves risk, but the risk of doing nothing is greater. Because if we do not act, we will get a nuclear Iran, an Iran with tens of thousands of ballistic missiles.
Some of those ballistic missiles have already been fired in response. The US has a vast military footprint across the Middle East. And already impacts have been seen at the US naval base in Bahrain, headquarters of the Fifth Fleet. Qatar hosts the Al Udeid air base. The last time Iran struck, it was telegraphed in advance and largely performative. Not this time. There have also been reports of drones being intercepted over Iraq. Knowing exactly what is happening inside Iran is difficult at this point, with most communications down. But state TV broadcast this statement.
According to the information obtained from these two corrupt regimes, their operations in Tehran and other cities will continue. Therefore, as much as possible, while maintaining calm, travel to other cities to stay safe from the evils of these two regimes.
In January, when widespread street protests gripped the country, President Trump promised help was on its way before taking no immediate action. In today's speech, he said that help had finally arrived.
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations. For many years, you have asked for America's help, but you never got it. No president was willing to do what I am willing to do tonight. Now you have a president who is giving you what you want. So let's see how you respond.
Iran now faces the biggest military build-up in the Middle East for more than 20 years, and a US administration which has explicitly called for its destruction. It seems likely this conflict will escalate in dangerous and unpredictable ways. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Let me show you the pictures above Tel Aviv at the moment. The IDF said that a missile did come down in the centre of the country, but as we've seen before, although they have, of course, the air defence systems in place, Iron Dome and David Sling, they wouldn't necessarily intercept missiles that were not targeted at civilian infrastructure. We saw previously last summer that those that were heading into no man's land were allowed to fall. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a target has been hit in Israel. Also important to tell you that in the next few minutes we're being told by Iranian state television that the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei will speak to the nation, which dispels suggestions that he had been injured or killed in these earlier strikes. So too the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who's been speaking to NBC News, stressing the point which they made just an hour ago, that they are interested in de-escalation and returning to the talks, which is an important point. Donald Trump, we're told, was briefed ahead of the strikes that the operation would be high risk but possibly high reward. that needs to be explored further, what high reward might mean. And we've also heard from the E3 countries, France, Germany and the UK, have consistently been urging the Iranian regime to stick with the talks, to end the nuclear program and curb the ballistic program. We did not participate in these strikes, they say, but we are in close contact with the United States and Israel, and they will speak together, at least the permanent members of the Security Council, when they meet in New York for a special session tonight at 4 o'clock Eastern to discuss the military action that has unfolded. Well, in the last few minutes, Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking in Downing Street. Here's his statement.
Earlier this morning, the United States and Israel struck targets in Iran. Iran has since launched indiscriminate strikes across the region. I know the British people and communities across our country will be deeply concerned about what this means for security and stability, and for the fate of innocent people across the region, which for so many of us includes friends and family members. So whilst the situation is evolving, I want to set out our response. The United Kingdom played no role in these strikes. But we have long been clear. The regime in Iran is utterly abhorrent. They have murdered thousands of their own people, brutally crushed dissent, and sought to destabilize the region. Even in the United Kingdom, the Iranian regime poses a direct threat to dissidents and to the Jewish community. Over the last year alone, they have backed more than 20 potentially lethal attacks on UK soil. So it is clear they must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. That remains the primary aim of the United Kingdom and our allies, including the US. I condemn Iran's attacks today on partners across the region, many of which are not parties to this conflict. We extend our support and solidarity to them as part of our commitments to the security of our allies in the Middle East. We have a range of defensive capabilities in the region, which we've recently strengthened. Our forces are active, and British planes are in the sky today as part of coordinated regional defensive operations to protect our people, our interests, and our allies, as Britain has done before, in line with international law. We've stepped up protections for British bases and personnel to their highest level. We are also reaching out to UK nationals in the region and doing everything we can to support them. I've been speaking with leaders today from the E3 and across the region. It is vital that we prevent further escalation and return to a diplomatic process. We want to see peace and security and the protection of civilian life. Iran can end this now. They should refrain from further strikes, give up their weapons programs, and cease the appalling violence and repression against the Iranian people, who deserve the right to determine their own future, in line with our long-standing position. This is the route to de-escalation and back to the negotiating table.
Prime Minister speaking in the last hour about the defensive operations that the British military involved in the region. While I'm listening to that, my screen is flashing with all sorts of news from across the region. We're being told that the IRGC has launched a new wave of missiles against US bases in the Gulf. Although the all-clear siren has just sounded in Bahrain, the Ministry of Interior had earlier asked residents not to go out unless absolutely necessary. The Kuwaiti authorities say a drone targeted the international airport there. Of course, there's been huge disruption to airlines across the region, lots of them grounded that were incoming and outbound. We're told by the Kuwaitis that there were only light wounds among several workers on the apron of the Kuwaiti International Airport. Limited damage, but not so, as you can see there, in Bahrain. That's a missile that came in targeting the 5th Fleet, the US base there in Bahrain. And the retaliation has been extensive so far. Let's speak to our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Bashega, who's in Jerusalem. And we were warned that it would be like this, Hugo. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said in Geneva on Thursday that were there any airstrikes in Iran, there would be a forceful response, and we've seen it today.
Yeah, Christian, and the Iranians have been saying that the response would be different from the response that the Iranians gave last year during the 12-day war. And they said that American targets across the region, American interests across the region would be targeted, and not only places and targets in Israel. And we've seen that, according to Israeli officials, dozens of missiles have been fired by Iran targeting Israel as part of this Iranian response to this American and Israeli attack. Now, about 20 minutes ago, we had another update by the Israeli military saying that another wave of missiles had been launched by Iran. And about 10 minutes ago, here in Jerusalem, we heard again the air raid alerts and loud explosions indicating that the air defenses had been activated. And emergency services are saying that they are responding to calls indicating that 3 locations in central Israel have been hit, but there haven't been reports of casualties so far. Again, this is a country that has a very sophisticated air defense system, and last year we saw that the vast majority of missiles were intercepted by the country's military. But again, the Iranians had been saying that, this response would be more comprehensive, and there had been the fear, across the region that these attacks on Iran could lead to a wider regional conflict with the participation, the involvement of those groups across the region that have been supported by Iran, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen. And we're seeing here today that, this very swift response by the Iranian authorities targeting countries all across the region, and not only Israel.
The defensive missiles that you're talking about, the air defense missiles, of course they're supplied by the United States, but the delivery timeline on that is quite significant. And there was some anxiety expressed within the Pentagon last week that a campaign couldn't be sustained because...
Alles okay?
Further strikes, give up their weapons programs, and cease the appalling violence and repression against the Iranian people, who deserve the right to determine their own future in line with our long-standing position. This is the route to de-escalation and back to the negotiating table. Thank you.
Once again, that was a video message posted from British Prime Minister Keir Starmer as he shared that to social media. Now, once again, the latest we have from the White House was that video posted by President Trump earlier this morning. As of right now, we are not anticipating to hear from the White House today. No press conference is scheduled. Let's talk about international law here, though. Let's bring in Natasha Hausdorff. She is live for us in London. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I want to get your initial reaction here to what we just heard there from Prime Minister Starmer.
Yes, well, disappointingly weak and unfortunately incredibly out of touch with developments in the region, where even the Saudis now seem to have taken off the gloves in respect of the Iranian indiscriminate attacks that we heard referenced across the region. The fact that the British Prime Minister wasn't told in advance of this operation early this morning by the United States and by Israel, I think speaks volumes for how Israel and the US regard this current government in the United Kingdom and how far they feel able to trust them. And of course, that comes hot on the heels of the British government warning the United States not to use UK military bases for the purpose of striking Iran. So certainly that mealy-mouthed statement that we just heard highlights many of the tension points, perhaps, between the United States and the UK. Very, very different, of course, to the statement that we had from the President earlier this morning, or late last night, your time, Christy. So that's a striking difference indeed.
All right, and throughout this interview, I do just want to let you know we are going to be getting in these updates. So just want to confirm, Israel now under state of emergency. Is that what we just had up there? Okay, so we're just getting that in that Israel now under a state of emergency. That's just coming into our newsroom. This really filtering in here at such a rapid rate at this point, whether that be reaction or updates there in Israel. All right, so let's continue though, Natasha. I want to ask, under international law, how is the legality of military strikes like the ones on Iran assessed? What are those legal frameworks that govern whether a state can use force?
Well, the law of armed conflict is split into two areas. There's the law that governs an initial use of force, and then there's the law that governs an ongoing use of force in the context of an armed conflict. So as far as Israel is concerned, there has been an ongoing armed conflict between Israel and Iran for decades. And so the question of a resort to force is, in fact, not relevant. That's automatically taken to be lawful. And the question then is, well, what are the strikes targeting? We understand that the Israelis have been specifically targeting Iranian military installations, focusing those attacks in particular on the ballistic missile program and launchers, because of course throughout the last 6 hours plus, Israel and Israeli civilians have been under incessant rocket fire, ballistic missile fire from Iran. So that's where the focus of Israel strikes have been. So far as the United States is concerned, well, the president's statement used the term preemptive strike, and that is also considered to be a lawful exercise of self-defense in international law, where a threat is considered to be imminent. And the president's, I'm sure, carefully chosen words outlined how the nuclear threat by Iran was regarded by the government of the United States as an imminent threat, not just to Israel, but of course to the United States and the rest of the civilized world. And in fact, Iran's response in indiscriminately targeting so many countries around the region perhaps underscores the remarks that the president made at the outset of this military activity. I know that you've been focusing on a few US lawmakers that are suggesting that this conduct is illegal both under international law and US constitutional law. And I can say that in the international legal framework, all of the justifications appear to be there in the president's speech. There hasn't really been any proper analysis supporting these claims that these strikes are illegal. And in fact, every indication is in fact that the action taken by the US is lawful under international law. When we come to the US Constitution, I'm no constitutional lawyer in the United States, but even I know the powers of the president to use force. And the statement that the president used this morning was in relation to combat operations. It doesn't seem to me that there has been any declaration of war, and the requirement on the president, as I understand it under the War Powers Act, is simply to inform Congress of actions that are taken in this instance for the protection of the interests of America, for the protection of US citizens, or indeed for those further afield. But it strikes me as extremely important to highlight the interests of the United States, those American citizens that were under threat from a relentless Iranian aggressive stance. It made no bones about its intent to wipe both Israel off the map, the United States off the map. In fact, death to the United Kingdom or to England was also frequently included in its declarations. So in that circumstance, in the context of the self-defense and the defense of its citizens that the United States embarked upon perhaps afresh overnight and this morning, those protestations of illegality simply do not make sense to me.
And as you were mentioning U.S. lawmakers, before I ask you this next question, I did just want to share, we're getting in this reaction here from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. He has this to say: when I talked to Secretary Rubio, I implored him to be straight with Congress and the American people about the objectives of these strikes and what comes next. Iran must never be allowed to attain a nuclear weapon. But the American people do not want another endless and costly war in the Middle East. When there are so many problems at home, the administration has not provided Congress and the American people with the critical details about the scope and immediacy of the threat. A pretty lengthy post there from Chuck Schumer that we did just want to share here before we move on, as we were just touching on lawmaker reaction here in the U.S. But if we go back to international relations here, if international